What's going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous George and Goes are back with another legend of the sport. Today we get to talk to Rich Franklin, a former UFC middleweight champion, now vice president with one championship. And they have a big show coming up. One 169, Malykhin versus Kane. And it's November 8th, Friday in Bangkok, Thailand. You can watch the show on Amazon Prime. They got a big title fight at the top of the bill, Anatoly Malykhin versus Umar Kane. But let me tell you guys something. They mix in the Muay Thai. The great Rod Tang will be back competing as well in Muay Thai. Adriano Moraes, a former flyweight bantamweight champ over at One Championship, he's banging on the card. Also, they just signed a young cat, and I'm sure we'll get to him, Cade Rutolo, who is a master grappler. Big signing for One Championship, Marcus Buchecha. Pretty stacked card, Rich. I like what you guys got going on Friday, man.
This card is really stacked. Did you guys see the weigh-ins by chance when Anatoly and Rugrug faced off against each other?
Did not. We were a little busy yesterday with the last week or so with all this stuff going on here in the United States. But tell us what happened.
Yeah, that's just they were squaring off, and Anatoly stuck his hands out, and Rugrug slapped his hands down like he was like pointing at him or something. And poor Mitch Chilson, my co-commentator when I'm doing commentary, all 170 pounds of him was trying to separate, 500 plus pounds of meat because these two guys locked up. And so this one, it will definitely be as advertised. I'm sure they genuinely don't like each other. So I don't know. It was fun to watch that from a fan perspective.
Just because we're on the topic, what was your favorite face-off that you ever had, whether it was at a press conference or ceremonial weigh-in, or either you as a participant or even you having to stop one? Do you have any good ones there?
I'll say that I liked I don't think this was a face-off, but remember the press conference with Tito Ortiz and Ken Shamrock, and they were going back and forth, and it got to the point where Ken threw the chair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Tito goes
to have the ability to get underneath someone's skin that much is that's a master class on psychological manipulation pre-fight. So that was well played by Tito to get Ken off of his game. So I appreciated not necessarily seeing the chair throwing, but just seeing how much you can alter someone's feelings in that moment in order to give you a little bit of an edge as the fight goes on.
What about you in the face-off? Was there one that was more intense than the others?
Oh man, several memories come to mind. I'll say this: when I moved back up to 205 and I was fighting Forrest, when he and I squared off at the actual weigh-ins face-off, I felt like we were about the same height, and because we're both dehydrated and cut. But keep in mind, I was a 185er moving back up to 205, so I only had to cut from maybe 211, 212 pounds down to 205. And the next day when we walked into the cage, I remember when we were brought to the center of the ring, and I was just looking up at him, and I swear that man grew 3 inches overnight, just rehydrating. And I just thought, like, is this the same guy that I faced off against yesterday? So yeah, I can remember that for sure.
Yeah, and speaking of a multi-weight fighter, how about Anatoly Malykhin? What he's done, pretty crazy. You know what I'm saying? 3 different weight classes, successes and all, still undefeated. Talk about that, because this is not too many people do that.
Yeah, I've stood next to Anatoly. We've worked out the gym at the same time. I've never worked out with him. I always like to just kind of lock up, just see what that felt like, because he just looks like, when you're standing next to him, he just looks like the Rock of Gibraltar. Like, he just does not move. And so for him, with his size, his hips, he's just a thick person. For him to be able to move all the way down to our middleweight class and still compete with the kind of energy that he does, because once you start cutting so much weight, you get to thinking like, well, even, and when I say cutting weight, different than weight cutting for, weigh-in process, he's still got his hydration policies, but he had to be able to strip all that body mass off of him prior to the weight so that he could still weigh in hydrated. And you have to start questioning, like, is this going to affect strength, explosiveness, endurance, things of that nature? And he's got gas for days. So it doesn't matter if he's, this fight he's got coming up. I would imagine that Malykhin will be able to run the full 25 minutes on this thing. But make no mistake about it, Rogrog, when he had that match against Buchecha, I was shocked and surprised because they ran a high-paced match, 2 heavyweight fighters, and a lot of that was just grappling. But he made it through that 15 minutes at a pretty high pace for someone his size. He carries a lot of muscle, so this is going to be interesting to see these two guys lock up.
Umar Kane, that's right, better known as Rug. He's his opponent. Have you ever worked out with him? This is a lot of force colliding here on Friday night.
I think I was going to work out with Omar. I'd probably work out with his leg. I think that's about the size of me completely. No, I haven't. And I don't get to work out with many of these guys because I typically see them during fight week only. And, you're there and you're there for a job at this point in time. And so even if I could be the kind of partner that would mix in with them and they don't have to worry about me hurting them, I don't know anything about their game plan and the preparation and what kind of the study of their opponent. Like I couldn't be an effective partner for them. Plus, I don't know. I would imagine maybe working out with fighters prior to the fight and might be showing favoritism or something. Perhaps there's a conflict of interest. Never really thought about that before.
Mm-hmm. Well, luckily your name has status in the sport, and so if you did do it, I think people would understand it's probably just your breakdown so that you can call a better fight or talk about a better fight versus any favoritism. So I think you've earned that. But talk about the importance of this fight. This is a title defense for Malykhin, and this is the main event. But I think it features two of one's biggest stars, colliding at the right time.
Yeah, for sure. With this match, it's been a while since we've had a heavyweight title match on, particularly with Malykhin bouncing around and the matches that he did in the different weight classes and whatnot. So we're back to this. We've had other heavyweight matches, but this is the first time that we've had the king in that division back again. So this is a big deal. And Rogrog has, I'll say this, I wasn't a big believer when he came into the organization. I was like, but each fight he's been able to close the gap a bit more and a bit more. I think Malykhin's going to be a tough opponent for him, very tough opponent. So he will need to up his game because Malykhin is more of the complete package. So I do believe that Rogrog will have to probably rely on his wrestling a bit more. But Rogrog's a super athletic guy too. And because of his wrestling, he's a bit more unorthodox with his striking. So that can oftentimes make good fighters look bad as well.
Rich, I know that you study the game every fight equally, but some of these fighters that come over, especially in one, have these really cool personalities when we talk to them and just the flair that they give during the fights. How many fights do you need to see, or how much interaction do you have to have with these fighters before you can kind of tell whether or not they have that it factor?
Okay, so when you talk about that it factor, that it factor is different than skill. I remember before I actually worked on the executive side of this, when I was an athlete, I used to tell people like, look, you need to have a trifecta of tools or of gifts. First of all, you need to be talented. Like you need to be able to fight. If you can't fight in this game, then you're not going to make it. But it doesn't hurt to be a good talker. And obviously it doesn't hurt to be kind of easy on the eyes. I've been in photo shoots before for magazine covers where I've broken 2 or 3 cameras myself. And that's pretty much typically a testament to the good looks that you don't have. But I know I always tell people it's like these things help. And as an executive now, your ability to be magnetic in some way, shape, or form is really, really key. And we've seen that, like the modern day example of this, the most famous one obviously is Conor McGregor. Like this man has been able to just attract people to watching him fight. And so to have that kind of ability is really important. And I think this is something that fighters lack the understanding of. Even myself, I did. But I came in an era of MMA where I didn't have to be some sort of character or whatever. MMA needed a clean-cut Rich Franklin high school teacher at that time. And so that's just who I was. And that was appealing the everyday people's champ to the fans. So, but now there's you got to have some sort of angle because MMA is established and there has to be something. And that doesn't mean that you need to be playing a character like you would if you were a WWE wrestler or something like that. But you got to just kind of amp up those aspects of your personality that make people say, I'd love to sit down and have lunch with this guy, or I would, if I could work any corner or just be part of somebody's corner, I'd want to be in his corner or whatever. I'd love to sit down and have a half-hour conversation with Rich Franklin to see what he's like. That's the kind of stuff that makes people, beyond your ability to fight, want to buy a fight or a pay-per-view to watch you fight.
You know, when we talk about that side of our sport and you're in that room with other executives and you guys are talking about, let's say, the demographics, right, for one championship, what we're going to see out in that crowd, young people, older people, middle of the pack. Over here in the United States, things have kind of gone a different twist. Like in a couple of weeks, we're going to see Mike Tyson box. We're going to see box Jake Paul, right? And the people that are going to tune into that, it's going to be a pretty big mixture of different fans throughout different eras. What are the types of things that you guys talk about over at One Championship when you're trying to reach out to these types of communities? And, you know, since we're on that topic, what do you think, man? Mike Tyson's kind of our era, right? And then we got this young guy, Jake Paul. How do you see that one playing out as well?
Well, I'll start with the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul thing. The way I see this is kind of a lose-lose for both of these guys, because if you're Jake Paul and you beat Mike Tyson, then you just beat up a guy who was like, the perception is, I mean, first of all, before I say anything, it's Mike Tyson. Like Mike Tyson can rearrange, like he could punch me and like remove my soul from my body type of thing. I think about getting hit by Mike, and I always remember that scene in, like, I don't know, Spider-Man or whatever, where Doctor Strange hits Spider-Man and like Spider-Man's soul leaves his body. And that's kind of like, Mike has that ability, but the perception is like, he's 58 years old. And so if Jake beats him, he just beat a 58-year-old man. And so what does he get out of that? If Mike beats Jake, then that's big for Mike. But if it goes to a decision, then it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, who wins out of this is Netflix, because that's where the fight is aired. So that's going to be good. And I'm sure I'm going to be tuning in to watch. But yeah, I don't have a prediction on that, because I've heard all these previous conspiracy theories about the contracts and everything else. So, we'll see how this one unfolds. It's definitely captured my attention a little bit. I'll say this: my logical brain says to me, in what world does someone who has never been ranked in the top 50 of boxing beat one of the greatest champs of all time? But then again, Mike's 58, so we'll see. Going back to your other question, like when we're in a boardroom and we're talking about matchups and fights and things of that nature, what kind of stuff do we talk about? I think the primary thing that we talk about, obviously, we look at things. You obviously look at things like, if we're going to do a fight in Bangkok, it helps to have a star from Bangkok on the card. In this case, we have Rodtang on the card, but honestly, Rodtang has kind of transcended those borders like many other great athletes have. And I don't care where you are in the world, like people are just interested in watching Rodtang fight because his style is that interesting. But nonetheless, like typically if you're putting a fight on somewhere, you're going to want to have some local talent on that card so that it draws some of the local crowd. And then you're going to look at some of your bigger stars, whether they have that magnetic personality and they can just draw attention, or primarily the main thing that we discuss is matchups, like how that matchup is going to go and what kind of fight that you can expect to see out of something like that. And you talked about Cade at the top of the show, for example. Cade is a perfect example. When I think about the Cade Rotolo and Mujtaba matchup, that regardless of who wins in a fight like that, I believe that their styles as they collide is going to be a very high energy fight one way or the other. And so you definitely want matches on the card that are going to be exciting for the fans to watch, whether it's a grappling match, which we have done a really good job of being able to find these grapplers that press the pace on the ground when they're competing, whether in MMA or in BJJ for that matter, or if you just continue to keep the fight standing. We don't have a lot of snooze fests in one championship.
That's for sure. One other thing, or two other things I did want to talk to you about. I remember when we first talked to Demetrius Johnson, he was going to one championship, and we were talking about all the different things that he's going to have to deal with, right? The way and just, the different angles, the different looks, all that stuff. We have the opportunity to kind of do the reverse this time. Rainer de Ritter, he's going to be fighting in the UFC, right? And so now we pose those questions again that we used to pose to some of the Pride guys. When the Pride guys would come over, they'd say, we were so used to the ring, right? The different angles. Now we're in the octagon, moving around. Everything's just so bizarre. You fought in the UFC, so you're familiar with that type of stuff. What do you think are some of the things he's going to have to battle? Like, obviously, the weight that's completely different here, the angles of the cage. But what do you think? Like, what are some of the things that he's going to have to adapt to in this fight?
Yeah, I don't think the angles of the cage in an octagon really are that big of a deal. I mean, it's not much sharper, really. Once you get that many sides of a regular polygon, this is my math brain coming out. You're talking about the interior angles of that polygon. It's not a very sharp angle. I fought one time in an extreme challenge, a couple times actually, but in a ring. And I fought in a ring one time that was inside of a cage. And getting caught in that 90-degree angle of that ring, when it's a cage, like when you have ropes and you can kind of move around a little bit, that's a different story. But when you're in that 90-degree angle of that cage, like you're trapped. So I don't think that the adjustment to those corners in the octagon are going to make a big deal. As a matter of fact, when I was training for my fights, I would work inside of a cage from time to time, but most of the stuff that we did, like if we were working against the wall or something like that, we would choose one of the padded walls in the gym. And we had a particular corner that was built up so that we could do some corner drills at times. But if I just had a flat wall and I had to work on walking up the wall or something like that, that's all I needed. And we would choose the padded wall more often than not because these chain link fences, you can't condition yourself to get used to that. Like if you see a fighter sometimes, like it looks like a cheese grater has kind of rubbed down their back at the end of a fight if they've done a lot of cage work on that side. So I don't see the shape of a cage being a big difference maker for someone entering into the UFC versus one championship, unless when they were in one championship, they did all their matches in a boxing ring. Then that's going to make a difference, but that can make a difference on the flip side of things like being able to cut off the ring when you're moving around. When you have 90-degree angles like you do in boxing, it's much easier to cut off the ring with good footwork than it is in a more wide open space.
And then last question for me, if you take a look at my background, okay, and this is just me thinking outside the box, but I'm doing it because that's one thing one championship is known for doing. They think outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody like a Cris Cyborg, who's obviously under contract with another organization right now, but if she were to become available, if you look back here, she's got belts and she's worn, I think, 5 of the gloves that are back here. Mm-hmm. But we always say, like, wouldn't it be crazy if she went to one championship and got another belt, tried to at least? Do you think there would be any kind of interest in something like that for you guys over there if that were to become a possibility?
I think this is a Chatri conversation, Chatri and Matt Hume, because Matt's had a competition. But I think that's definitely a conversation that they would at least be interested in having. It's not one of those things where like, no, that we're not interested in that. That's something that would for sure intrigue them. And I say that because as a fan, I would personally be intrigued. If I was outside of this organization, I would be willing to watch and say, oh, can Cyborg capture? She's making her way up the ranks in one championship. I would be willing to watch that as a fan. So I think that's something that they would definitely be open to having a conversation about.
Well, I'm glad we talked a little bit about Road Tang being on the card because this card is very diverse. We got big guys, little guys, we got Muay Thai, we got title fights. And then there's another one that comes from the wrestling world, Amir Al-Akbari against Marcus Buchecha. Buchecha obviously wants to, keep progressing in the heavyweight division, right? After losing to Rug. Can you talk about that matchup? That's pretty intriguing. That's 2 big dudes, another set of maybe even bigger dudes colliding here on the same card.
Yeah, when I think about this matchup, I would, if I was in Buchecha's camp, I would look back at the matchup that he had with Rug and see what things they did well and what things they didn't do well, because it's difficult when you have good wrestlers on top of you. Rug's a good wrestler. Al-Akbari, obviously, he's got his wrestling accolades coming out of Iran. He's a really good top heavy guy. So Buchecha does a lot of bottom work, and he moves really, really well. I mean, he moves like a middleweight or a welterweight as a heavyweight grappler. So if I was in his camp, I would look at that matchup that I had against Rug and say, where were my mistakes here? Because I would imagine they're going to end up on the ground. There's a good chance at some point in time, if not a good portion of the time, Buchecha is going to be on the bottom of that, carrying a lot of Ali Akbari's, I almost said Omar, Ali Akbari's weight on top of him. So he's going to have to figure out some sort of strategy so he's not taking a lot of abuse, because, when you're heavyweights, first of all, it takes a lot of blood and oxygen to move those muscles for 15 minutes. But when you have someone that heavy on top of you, obviously this is a lot more. So he's definitely going to need to come into this fight with a really good strategy. And, make no mistake about it, Ali Akbari, when he swings, he swings with really, really bad intentions. So, it's one of those things that Buchecha will need to make some adjustments on the feet for as well. But I particularly like this matchup. I like the way that this one goes. I don't, even with heavyweights, I don't think you're going to see anybody just sitting in somebody else's guard and body, head, body, head. This one's going to progress.
Yeah, no, I like this one too. This is one of the ones that stood out when I was going over the card. Adriano Moraes is back as well. We didn't get a chance to get to him. We have to let you go. But I give everybody, I guess, one final pitch. Why would they tune in Friday, right, at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific? The World Series is over. Football's not till Saturday and Sunday. People get pulled in different directions. Tell everyone why One Championship is the place to be. Amazon Prime. Again, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific.
Well, listen, the election's over. If you need some consoling, this is a great place to go. If you're celebrating, it's a great place to go. We got some, like, the card is stacked from top to bottom. And, whether you're watching the newcomer Cade come out, even we didn't talk about Jackie Buntan and Nisa Mexen, like the ladies' world champion kickboxing fight that's on the card. Like, that's going to be an amazing fight as well, all the way down to crowd favorites with Rod Tang. And Anatoly is just one of those guys that when the U.S. audience particularly gets to know him, I believe that he's going to be one of those fighters that also transcends borders as well. He's entertaining inside the circle and inside the ring, and he is definitely magnetic with his personality outside of the ring. And if you didn't have a chance, go catch the weigh-ins, and if that doesn't get you hyped up, then I've just wasted a really good sales pitch.
No, seriously, this is one of your guys' better cards of the year, and we're definitely going to be tuning in. Rich Franklin will be on the call, and Rich, thank you so much for stopping by MMA Junkie Radio to promote the card, and we'll talk to you soon, my man.
Always enjoy being on here, fellas.